You still go to church, but you have questions. You still pray, but sometimes you wonder if anyone is listening. You still believe, but not as confidently as before. And that's the painful secret many Christians are hiding. Because sometimes the greatest threat to faith isn't sin, it's doubt. Not loud doubt, silent doubt. The kind that keeps you awake at night. The kind that whispers, what if I'm wrong? What if God isn't hearing me? Why did God allow this to happen? And suddenly, the faith that once felt so strong starts feeling fragile. Let's be honest, we are living in a generation flooded with information. Millions of videos, millions of opinions, millions of voices, people questioning Christianity, questioning the Bible, questioning truth, questioning God. And many believers are quietly struggling, not because they hate God, but because life happened. A prayer went unanswered, a loved one died, a relationship ended, a dream collapsed, and now they are asking questions they never thought they would ask. That process is often called deconstructing faith. But before we go deeper, let's understand something important. Having questions does not mean you have lost your faith. One of Jesus' own disciples struggled with doubt. His name was Thomas. After Jesus rose from the dead, the other disciples said, "We have seen the Lord." But Thomas replied, "Unless I see the nail marks and touch them myself, I will not believe." Imagine that. A disciple, a follower of Jesus, a man who witnessed miracles, still doubted. And here's what I love about Jesus. Jesus did not reject Thomas. He met him. He showed him the scars. He answered his questions. Because Jesus is not afraid of honest questions. And somebody needs to hear this today. God is not intimidated by your doubts. Let me ask you something. Have you ever prayed for something that never happened? Have you ever believed God for healing and didn't see it immediately? Have you ever watched bad things happen to good people and wondered why? If your answer is yes, welcome to being human. Even great believers ask hard questions. Sometimes people don't lose faith because of theology. They lose faith because of pain. Pain creates questions. Questions create confusion. Confusion creates distance, and distance creates doubt. The real issue is often not intellectual, it's emotional. A wounded heart can make God feel far away, even when He is standing right beside you. This is important. Doubt says, "God, help me understand." Unbelief says, "I don't want God." Those are not the same thing. In Mark, a desperate father told Jesus, "I believe, help my unbelief." What an honest prayer. He believed, but he was struggling, and Jesus still helped him. Why? Because God honors honest hearts. A modern story. A young woman grew up in church, loved worship, loved scripture, loved God. Then tragedy struck her family. She prayed, nothing changed. She prayed harder, still nothing changed. And for the first time in her life, she asked, "God, where are you?" She felt guilty for asking, ashamed, afraid. But what she didn't know was this: questions don't automatically destroy faith. Sometimes they become the doorway to deeper faith. Some people are deconstructing faith because they want to walk away from God. Others are deconstructing faith because they are trying to find Him again. And those are very different journeys, because sometimes God allows old, shallow beliefs to fall apart, so deeper faith can be built. Not weaker faith, stronger faith. Not borrowed faith, personal faith. Not childhood faith, mature faith. Listen carefully. Your questions do not scare God. Your doubts do not surprise God. Your struggles do not push God away. Jesus is still reaching for doubting people, still healing wounded faith, still rebuilding trust. And over the next few moments, we're going to discover something powerful. Doubt does not have to be the graveyard of your faith. It can become the construction site of a stronger one. Most people don't start doubting God in a classroom. They start doubting God in a crisis, a hospital room, a funeral, a betrayal, a heartbreak, a season of unanswered prayers, because it's easy to trust God when everything makes sense. The real test comes when it doesn't. And maybe that's where somebody is right now. You prayed, you believed, you trusted, and the outcome wasn't what you expected. Now you're asking, God, why? Many believers struggle because they expected life with God to be easier than it actually is. They thought, if I obey God, nothing bad will happen. If I pray enough, I won't suffer. If I have faith, life will always work out. Then reality arrives, and suddenly there is a gap between expectation and experience. That gap is where doubt often grows. Let's talk about someone surprising, John the Baptist, the man who prepared the way for Jesus, the man who baptized Jesus, the man who saw the Spirit descend from heaven. Yet later, sitting in prison, John sent a message asking, "Are you really the one, or should we expect someone else?" Think about that. John knew Jesus. John saw miracles. John heard God's voice. Yet suffering caused questions. And if John could struggle, you're not strange for struggling too. Have you ever expected God to do something by a certain time, and He didn't? Have you ever thought, I did everything right? Why is this happening? If yes, you're not alone. Many faithful people have stood exactly where you're standing. Sometimes the problem is disappointment. A young man faithfully attended church for years. He prayed every day, served faithfully, read his Bible. Then he lost his job unexpectedly. Month after month passed, no breakthrough, no answers, and slowly, frustration became doubt. Not because he stopped loving God, but because life didn't match what he expected. Can you relate to that? Maybe not with a job, maybe with a relationship, a health issue, a family situation, a dream that never happened. Here's something important. Jesus never promised a life without storms. In fact, in John he said, "In this world you will have trouble." Notice that. Not you might. You will. But then he added, "Take heart. I have overcome the world." Jesus promised presence in the storm, not absence of the storm. One of the hardest parts of faith is God's silence. Not because God has stopped working, but because silence feels confusing, and in silence our minds create stories. Maybe God forgot me. Maybe God is angry. Maybe none of this is real. But silence is not abandonment. A teacher is often silent during a test, yet still present, and God is often working behind the scenes in ways we cannot yet see. Real faith is not trusting God only when life makes sense. Real faith is trusting God when life doesn't make sense yet. That's harder, but it's deeper, and that's where mature faith begins to grow. Not when every question is answered, but when trust survives unanswered questions. Listen carefully. Your disappointment is not the end of your story. Your confusion is not the end of your faith. And God's silence is not proof of His absence. Sometimes the strongest faith is formed in the seasons that make the least sense. And in the next part, we're going to talk about something many Christians secretly battle. What happens when church people hurt you and affecting your faith in God? Sometimes people do not walk away from God because of atheists. They walk away because of Christians, a harsh church leader, a hypocritical believer, a betrayal from someone they trusted spiritually. And suddenly, the place that was supposed to help their faith becomes the place where their faith gets wounded. Maybe you've experienced that. Maybe someone who talked love treated you badly. Maybe someone who preached grace showed you judgment. Maybe someone represented Jesus you deeply. And now you're struggling. You stopped loving God. But because God's people disappointed you. Church hurt is real. Spiritual disappointment is real. Religious hypocrisy is real. Pretending these things don't exist doesn't help anyone. But here's something important. Just because someone misrepresented Jesus doesn't mean Jesus is like them. And many people accidentally confuse the two. A person gets hurt by a Christian, then they begin questioning Christ. A pastor fails, a leader disappoints them, a church lets them down. And suddenly they conclude, maybe God isn't real. But think about that. If a doctor treats you badly, does medicine stop working? No. The failure of the messenger does not cancel the truth of the message. And the failure of people does not cancel the faithfulness of God. What's fascinating is that Jesus never pretended religious people would always get it right. In fact, some of Jesus' strongest criticism was directed at hypocritical religious leaders. In Matthew, Jesus repeatedly confronted people who looked spiritual on the outside but were different on the inside. So when you discover hypocrisy, you are not discovering something Jesus ignored. You're discovering something he confronted. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been disappointed by someone you respected spiritually? Have you ever thought, if that's what Christianity looks like, I don't want it? Be honest. Many people have felt exactly that way. A young woman joined a church full of excitement. She wanted to grow closer to God. For a while, everything seemed wonderful. Then conflict happened. People gossiped. Friendships broke. Legal wounds. That distinction can save someone's faith. One of the enemy's favorite strategies is this. Get people hurt by believers, then convince them to leave Jesus. But don't give the enemy that victory. Don't let human failure become the reason you walk away from divine truth. Because your relationship with Christ is too valuable. Listen carefully. Church hurt is real. Spiritual disappointment is real. But Jesus is still worthy of your trust. The people who hurt you may need forgiveness. The experiences may need healing. The wounds may need time. But Christ remains faithful. What happens when you ask a question and nobody seems to have a satisfying answer? This is where many faith they have no questions, so they smile. No arms is because they are honest. David did not always sound confident. Sometimes he sounded confused, sometimes frustrated, sometimes heartbroken. In Psalm 13, David cried, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever?" Imagine that. A man after God's own heart asking difficult questions. Yet God did not reject him. Why? Because honest faith is still faith. Have you ever felt guilty for having questions? Have you ever thought, a real Christian shouldn't think this way? A real believer wouldn't struggle like this? If so, I want you to understand something. Questions do not automatically mean weak faith. Sometimes questions are signs that your faith is growing deeper. A university student grew up believing in God. Then he entered an environment where every belief was challenged. Professors challenged Christianity. Friends challenged Christianity. Social media challenged Christianity. For the first time, he had questions. Lots of questions. At first he panicked. He thought, maybe questioning means I'm losing faith. But over time, he learned something powerful. Questions can either push you away from God or pull you closer to Him. It depends on where you take them. Sometimes people act as if asking questions threatens God. It doesn't. God created the universe. God created your mind. God understands every question before you ask it. He is not nervous. He is not intimidated. He is not threatened. The God who holds